Welcome. I am going to share with you today. The presentation is showing love and mercy to unprepared parents and protecting families from deadly deception at life's end. There is going to be an opportunity for question and answer at the end of the presentation. So if you want to save up your questions for then, we'd be happy to answer them. And this will all be shared online as the other presentations at the conference. So allow me to introduce myself. I'm Kim Laube. I'm the Deputy Director of Lutheran Family Service. And that means I have a few roles that I play. One of them is to lobby at the State House for on life issues. And so that would be things surrounding the restriction of abortion or the stopping of abortion, as well as protecting the end of life also against physician-assisted suicide. So that's one of my roles. And then we are a multi-state operation that holds child placing licenses for adoption in Nebraska, South Dakota, and Illinois, and hopefully soon to be North Dakota very soon. And so we are not only do adoption in those areas, but we also do pregnancy counseling and training for women who are experiencing unplanned pregnancy and need some assistance in getting ready and prepared to be a parent. So today I'm going to be presenting alongside my boss, who is Reverend Max Phillips, and he'll be coming to the podium here in just a little bit for the second half of the presentation, which is going to be regarding physician-assisted suicide. So I'm pleased to be here today. I thank you for the opportunity, and we will dig in. So what we're going to cover is going to be unplanned pregnancy for unprepared parents, physician-assisted suicide, and then how you can make an impact in this area, and question and answer. So first, let me just introduce you briefly to Lutheran Family Service. Lutheran Family Service is an RSO of the LCMS Church. We have been working with children and hurting people since 1901. And we've done that in a variety of ways. We started out as an orphanage and looking for Christian families for children who were in need, and ran a couple different buildings in Fort Dodge, Iowa that were orphanages and that were helping serve children there. Over the years, we've had a variety of things that we've done, including being a maternity home, including helping those with intellectual disability and group home living, as well as mental health counseling. And we also serve our church body in helping to support healthy church workers. And we do that in a variety of ways, including consultation for mental health needs that congregants may be facing, pastors feel that they need some assistance with, and also just helping pastors and their families and other church workers with their ongoing needs in a very difficult occupation. So today we reach millions, and that would be in a variety of ways, both within our church body, outside of our church body, in the public square, and also in social media. So let me start by asking you, or letting you know, 80% of the women that end the life of their unborn child through abortion say a primary reason was lack of support and resources. It's an important thing for you to note that statistic, because these are things that we can do something about. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about that in that sense of how it is that we can impact women and their children and families. But let me first ask you, just a poll time here for those that are in the room in person. How many little girls and boys were saved from being killed in the womb following the first 2 months of the overturn of Roe versus Wade? Anybody have an idea of what that might be? Somebody give me a guess. Don't leave me standing. Zero? No, actually, it's better than that, right? No, actually, Guttmacher has said that they estimated 10,600 have been saved since just the first 2 months following the Overton of Roe versus Wade. So it's a little more promising than zero, but we definitely have a long way to go. Because that 80%, let me get my notes out here that we went backwards a little bit here, but that 80% actually reflected 744,128 babies of that 80% on an annual basis. And so I just want that to hit home a little bit about what it is we can do. So let's talk a little bit about unplanned pregnancy, unprepared parents. Who are this vulnerable population? What are they like, and what is it that we need to do to be able to assist them? So I'm first just going to give you a bit of a description of what would be very commonplace at Lutheran Family Service in terms of the characteristics of the person that we're seeing in our office. And the characteristics of the person that we're seeing in our office that has an unplanned pregnancy isn't necessarily a 16-year-old girl who got caught up in the moment with her very loving boyfriend who wants to stand by her side and they want to figure out a way to bring this child. That is not what we see. What we see is an awful lot of brokenness in a lot of different ways. Frequently, we see women who already have had one child out of wedlock or maybe two, that she's trying to single parent. We see moms who are addicted to methamphetamine and other drugs. We see women who are in very abusive relationships with men who are hanging on with them because they're able to receive some government assistance through housing or through food assistance and so forth. And there are men that are to some extent controlling of the woman and what it is she's going to do. That is more of the brokenness that we see and what things really look like in a pregnancy center. And of course, I don't speak 100% of the time that these are the circumstances, but I want you to understand the kind of brokenness that we are seeing and that it is larger than just a pregnancy that was unexpected. It is relational with the father, or possibly, to be really honest with you, the multitude of father possibilities that there are, especially if there's a woman who's involved with drugs and drug trade. And it's complicated, is what I'll tell you. But the decision making and the information that this mom needs, it starts with our idea of, are we going to be able to help her figure out what decision does she want to make? Is she coming to us at a time where she wants to make a decision for either carrying a pregnancy or having an abortion, or has she gotten to the point where she is interested in adoption or parenting and she's ruled out abortion? But having a methodical way that we can walk through that decision-making process is very helpful for our staff. But before I get into that, I want you to understand also that Lutheran Family Service also offers spiritual guidance. And sometimes women will accept that spiritual guidance, that we can pray with them, that we can bring in God's word and talk to them from that perspective. And sometimes they will refuse that. But we also see that later, when we create relationship with her, that later in that pregnancy or after the birth of that child, we see that she will open up to the idea of having some spiritual guidance and help, and that we can bring the gospel message to her. And so that can happen in various parts along the way. But this decision-making about what comes next, one of the things that we use is called the Ottawa Decision-Making Guide. And if you're familiar with social work, or maybe you've been in the medical practice, you may have heard of this before. And I'm not going to share it on the screen, but I will share the resource on the resource page. When it comes up, you can snap a picture, or you'll have this online later and you can take a look at it. But this resource guide, it's a decision-making guide that really helps to define what are the person's options, how do they feel about each one of those options. So it's kind of a glorified pros and cons list, but what it does is it will draw out what is the area where she feels ill-equipped to make the decision because she doesn't have enough information. And that opens the door wide open to be able to have a discussion about things she may not know about, but she maybe had a negative connotation, say, towards adoption. But once we start to unpack what these options are, we realize that her only frame of reference was, an adoption story that went wrong in foster care with someone in her family, years ago or something of that nature, where we can open up that door to talk about the realities of adoption today. And, it helps her to understand with this decision-making guide that there are things that she doesn't know and that seeking information is okay. Now, the other part to this information that's really important is that not being just one-sided. We obviously have a child placing license at Lutheran Family Service, but we do not exist in order to place children for adoption and find children for couples who desire to be parents. We exist because sometimes the moms that we are serving need to place their child for adoption in order for that to be best for her and her child. And so it's obviously a subtle difference, but it is a very significant difference to how and why we do the work that we do. A good majority of the women that we serve are going to need to know how to train themselves up to be good parents. They feel unprepared to do that. Maybe they have had zero role models in their life that have any, they maybe didn't have good parenting by their own parents. And they need some training. And so there's an excellent resource if you have not heard of this before. It is called Bright Courses. It is a curriculum that is online that has over 150 different courses that teach things from childbirth to parenting a toddler to navigating difficult relationships, how to co-parent with another person in your life. All of these things are done and they have a spiritual component that can be turned on or turned off depending on the client and whether or not she will receive the information happily. And so we found these courses to be exceptional. We can do this side by side with a woman. We can do this as a group class online, but allowing us to reach more and more women with classes. And this has certainly become popular with a lot of PRCs that we are in communication with. So one additional thing that we need to think about with moms who are unexpectedly pregnant is material goods. This seems to be an issue for many women, which will be, how will I get a crib? How will I get a stroller? How will I get a car seat? There are these things that I'm going to need that I don't have. And sometimes it can lead them to feeling a bit of despair and feeling like abortion might be the answer for her. And so I want to let you know, I'm going to show you a resource page here in a little bit. You can snap a pic of it that will allow you to find websites where these pregnancy resource centers exist. How do you locate them? There are over 2,500 of them in the US. There are 42 that are in Iowa alone, which is my home state. And we have established relationships with these PRCs to know and understand what it is they do, how they do it, and so that we can direct a woman towards being able to either, in a lot of cases, they earn their car seat by attending a parenting class or however many classes is necessary. So it's an earn to learn type of program. You've probably heard of that before. So there are other organizations that exist only for the material good purpose, such as Mary's Helping Hands is one that we have in Iowa, but there are lots and lots of local church-based groups that do this as well. Now, I had hoped by this time when we made a pitch to be able to come and to do this, I had a grandiose idea that we were going to have some programming in place that hasn't quite transpired yet. I still believe it will in Iowa, and I want to tell you about it. It is called Care Portal. And this is a not-for-profit organization that has technology that connects church bodies with individuals who are in need. And then there's a person that's in between, or an agency such as ourselves at Lutheran Family Service, that are vetting the need that that woman or family has, and then connecting them with church bodies that can meet the need. For instance, I need a stroller, I need a car seat, I need bunk beds, I need whatever the item is. And so this would be something, if you have interest in your community, about trying to find and locate a way that you might be able to impact. Care Portal would be one of those things that I would suggest, and we'll look at that again here when I get that resource page up. So there are many, many groups. and ways for women to be able to receive these things. And then I'd like to tell you that there is possible legislation as well that not organizations, but states can look at in regards to this specific issue. So in the state of Iowa, we've been working on something called the Moms Act, which is more options for mothers. That act specifically says that there will be $2 million appropriated that will be reimbursed for PRCs who give material goods to moms or provide counseling for moms as long as they don't refer or perform abortions. So when you have a state that is friendly towards the idea of alternatives, this may be some legislation that you want to consider putting forward. And on the resource page, I will also give you a link to that specific language so that it can be considered. So one of the other things that we do in order to try and really connect all that we are doing for moms and children is to find like-minded partners, and they do exist. And there are times where we can partner with organizations and understand what they do. We may not do everything, entirely the same, but they're working towards the same goals. And so I put a list of them here of things for you to consider about where you could find some organizations that would be like-minded. And some of these are going to be national, and some of them are going to be state by state. And I would point out the top of the list, I just indicated Christian adoption. And I'm just going to make a note for you here that I'm going to tell you it's going to be harder and harder for you to find this. Because the way of Christian adoption has really been set aside with the pressure for creating families with same-sex couples. And so you see organizations from the past that have been, traditionally a Christian organization that has formed families in a godly manner, that have made decisions that they are going to work with the culture, within the culture, and they've kind of bent to that way of thinking. And I would tell you that give me a call, and I'll be on the resources as well. And if I can help you in your state find a Christian adoption agency, I will do so. But I think there is a great need and a calling and I hope from this church body that we can create more Christian adoption with families that are formed in a godly manner. So. Okay, now the other thing I want to talk about briefly is the importance of marketing. One of the things that we learned is Lutheran Family Service. Okay, I don't know if this is going to come to shock of any of you, but it is possible that there were some people out there that thought maybe they don't want to come to a place called Lutheran Family Service because I might be judged. And I might feel awfully bad about being in the predicament that I am in and talking to someone who's clearly religious. So that being said, it is still the same organization. It is still the same loving people who want desperately to tell them about Jesus and to help them through mercy in their situation. But we have branded differently in order to be able to reach more women. And so that doing business as a brand is called Many Hearts. And we launched this in May of 2022 with a marketing person way smarter than me. And so glad to have her serving in that way. We had a 200% increase in the number of women that we were serving. That's huge because having that opportunity to be involved in those women's lives and to be able to provide that parenting training and provide that adoption service and to provide for her just the mercy, it has been amazing, and there are amazing stories to share. We have video content as well as written content that is really a very important part of the marketing strategy. Direct mailing with OBGYNs is another huge part, but I will tell you the key to Christian adoption is a good working relationship with the PRCs. Those are the folks that are doing the ultrasounds, the STDs, they're seeing women very early in pregnancy. And if we can work alongside them to provide parenting training, especially if the PRC doesn't do that themselves, and many of them don't, some of them are medical model only and they don't provide that. we're able to walk alongside them, and the PRCs in Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, and South Dakota are over the moon about the fact that we have a doing business as change to our marketing plan in order that we can reach more women. So that's been very helpful. So there are legislative possibilities. I already mentioned the Moms Act, so I'm not going to talk through that one again. But I would say, first of all, if you don't know what the abortion policy is in your state, just do a little research. And it's going to, call your local Right to Life, your state affiliate, and find out, because I imagine that a lot of you don't completely understand what's happening, especially after Roe has been overturned, and in a statewide situation that we don't know where does our legislation stand. So much of it is caught up in the court right now. But finding out and identifying what is it and what needs to happen next, and being a part of that. Identifying who are the LCMS and other pro-life legislators that serve in your state. In Iowa, when we started our program on this issue, there were 10 that were serving in our Iowa legislature. That was a pretty good percentage. We were super happy to find them. And interestingly enough, they didn't know each other were LCMS. And so when we got them together, it was kind of a big surprise. It's like, hey, look, we have what we call now a little LCMS caucus in Iowa. And but doing those kinds of things are important. Know who those people are. There are certainly two different methodologies about legislation, some of it being incremental, which I think you're kind of aware of, and that is, a portion of the children are going to be saved from abortion, say in a heartbeat bill, or there are exceptions, and that was talked about earlier today by our friend from Illinois. I'm sorry, I forgot your first name, Christy. But they're also life at conception bills. And so knowing a little bit about what those things are, I'm going to give you in the resource page, there'll be a link to a life at conception bill that was filed in Iowa. And it's language you can use and copy somewhere else and ask your legislators to move things like that forward. And the other thing I would tell you is that adoption reform is another thing that can be worked on in order to assist the women that we're serving. So sometimes adoption can be very difficult. We talked when in Christy's talk, there was a comment that was about birth fathers and so forth, and especially in a rape situation and so forth. Before we changed some laws in Iowa, a rapist actually had parental rights, and they could use that as leverage to get, if a woman wanted a place for adoption, he could stop that unless she dropped the rape charges. So there's weird things like that need to be addressed, that are, begged to be addressed, but there's other adoption reforms that can happen as well, that will make things a little bit easier for women to be able to make that decision. So here's the helpful resources page. So those of you who are in here, if you want a picture of the page, you can take a look at the variety of things that are there, or if you're online, you'll be able to click on those links. I'll give just a minute if you're going to take a picture. So brightcourses.com, care portal, we talked a little bit about that. There's the decision-making guide that's on there, and we talked a little bit about that. And there's a variety of websites where you can find crisis pregnancy centers that give you maps and dots and all the things so that you can find where they are. But creating a relationship with your PRC, it will really lock you into how could you volunteer, how can you make a difference in your community. So you can take action today, and you could volunteer at a PRC, and that may be simple things like sorting just material goods and items like that. Or maybe you have the ability to be able to share with a woman or some social work background or counseling background. You could serve on a board of directors. You could give monthly to help support a PRC. You could most certainly pray, contacting legislators. Consider running for office. It is not an outlandish thing to think about. So give that some consideration as well. Now, when we get to the end, we'll take some questions and answers. But before then, I would like to bring up Reverend Max Phillips, and I will let him give his full introduction. He is my boss, and he's going to talk to you about physician-assisted suicide.
It was about 7 years ago or so. We were working at the General Assembly, and after the legislation had all been done, it was the last days of the session. All of a sudden, a state senator from Iowa City, in this case, held a hearing on a bill that he was proposing, even though there was no chance this bill could be brought into consideration. And the bill was physician-assisted suicide. And he brought it up because he knew that as a strategy that's well used today in cultural change, persistence and consistency is a way to move forward evil. And frankly, he began to have this hearing, the media picked up on it. Not too long after that, the former CEO of Principal Financial, a large insurance financial investment company, committed suicide by jumping out of his 14th-story apartment in downtown Des Moines at noon. And the newspaper seized on that because they found out that he had some kind of disability, a disease, that it would have been so much better, kinder, if he would have been able to take his own life. And they turned him into the patron saint of death. Every year since, that bill has been introduced into the Iowa legislature. And I'll tell you the truth, I would bet you it's introduced in every legislature, at least talked about. It's the law of the land today in about 10 states, Canada, much of Europe, and it is an evil that is run of the church. In 1973, many people would say the church was asleep when the Roe decision was here. And we've been playing defense for 50 years. It's time to get on offense ahead of this particular issue because it does great damage to society. Poll here, obviously, and I'll give you the actual figures, but I'll tell you a little poignant statistic. Anybody have an idea about how many folks think this is okay? You can almost double it. About 72% of folks think that this is okay. And it's very seductive because if you look at how our children today are raised, how people in society are formed, suffering is something that nobody wants. And so we deal with it by medication, by alcohol, or by death. This isn't just for elder people or diseased people. This is the teenage thought as well. When my girlfriend dumps me or my boyfriend does something I didn't like, death becomes the answer in this culture to suffering. And that is, of course, obviously very ungodly. 72% of folks think this is okay. When we present this subject in churches, we generally take a poll ahead of time to ask that question. Is this godly or not? That's paraphrased. A vast majority of the, and we ask their age, vast majority of the people our age, I'm older than y'all, but the adulthood ages say, yeah, we get it. It's not right. Vast majority of the children and the teenagers say, sure, what's wrong with that? And if you're a pastor, you may have been asked, what's wrong with having grandma go see Jesus 6 months early? Those questions are real. Words matter. And we saw this in same-sex marriage, which has gone through various iterations of language. But if you control the language, you control the argument. And in this particular case, they have a head start on controlling the language. Here's how it's referred to often: medical aid in dying, death with dignity, compassionate choices, all of those things. And actually, when you look in your state legislature, if you find a bill, it'll be under one of these headings. The Act for Compassionate Choices. And that really does put a framework around it that seems nice and neat and tidy and right. And indeed, it's one of the things that is very important for us to change the language. When we begin to use the word physician-assisted suicide, it offends people. And that's our aim, because that's exactly what we're talking about, is assisted suicide. These are the states, 10 states, plus the District of Columbia. Colorado, you see there, was interesting. It was one of the most recent ones. It was actually voted in by the referendum of the public, not through the state legislature. Oregon, obviously, is the hallmark, if you will, the banner child here. Oregon, interestingly enough, since they brought in assisted death, have had to spend a lot more money on teenage death, because teenagers have been taught that the answer to suffering is death. And so now they've gone very much, they have to spend a lot of resources to try to educate children that, no, don't do this, even though that's what we do for the elderly. One state has legal medical aid in dying via court ruling, but the rest of these legislatures, grassroots efforts, persistent application of movement, that's what they're looking for. In many cases, the media is highly supportive. In fact, if you look and measure the media exposure, the way it's portrayed is tremendously overwhelming as opposed to those that would argue against this. Well, here's the answer, obviously, and we've had some great debates in the forums where this has become the law. Depression is treatable, and yet in some places in Europe, if you have a diagnosis of depression, you can have assisted suicide. You can get a prescription to do that. Pain, we know you can manage it, and that's something that we continue to work on. Had a great doctor provide some testimony that someone was challenging her on, the suffering is just immense. It's unbearable. And she was challenged on, what do you say about that? And she said, it's time to find another doctor. And the reality is that sometimes that is the case. Elderly abuse. This is a big one for us because part of our ministry is running 3 care communities. And we have about, 150 residents, about 250 employees. And we're surrounded by death in a natural, godly way. It happens. And even though that's sad, people deal with it because they know Christ and they know that this is okay. But imagine the impact when death becomes a strategy, when death becomes something that is a financial opportunity, when death becomes an insurance company's decision. And we see this. One of the things we specialize in is Alzheimer's care. And I've had people tell me numerous times, Pastor, I don't want our kids to come and see Dad anymore. And I'll say, why not? I say, because I don't want them to remember him like this, and he doesn't remember them. And, it's just this really heartfelt argument to try to convince them that it's okay. God has this person, God, child of our Lord. And this life is just as valuable today as it was when he was totally with it, or she was totally with it as well. And if you ever minister in care centers, you know that there are really interesting ways that the Holy Spirit connects those that are suffering from this disease in very meaningful and valuable ways. If you ever, we sing at our worship, we have 3 worship services at these centers on Sundays. The opening hymn is always the same. Jesus loves me. And even the most demented in a medically sensed way can sing it, and they have such great pleasure and joy because they can connect that thought. And yet the answer is, gosh, it's costing a lot to keep Mom here. She wouldn't want all of her money to be spent this way. When death becomes a strategy, there is this certain horror that takes place in care communities, because then people have to wonder, should I be doing this? They're thinking about it. What does the Lord say about this? And why would it matter? Because frankly, nobody comes to see me anymore in some cases. Loneliness is a form of death in many ways. We need to combat that. Here are some other end-of-life things that are happening. And again, the church needs to play, in my opinion, offense. Hospice is changing. It's one of those interesting phenomenons that when I started ministry, every hospice was good and valuable and helpful. Today, our particular care communities deal with about 17 hospices, which is about 4 times the number when we first started. And that number continues to increase, and many mergers and other things happen. And it is a money opportunity that's highly reimbursed by Medicare. Many cases, what's happening is the change is from a quality of life until death to a quality death. That seems like a subtle distinction, but it is very much one that is God, that we need to challenge in a way that says, really, death is going to happen. Natural death is going to happen. But our job is not to make sure that death hastens, or that death is caused to become such a way that I don't see their suffering anymore. Advanced directives, we do a lot of work around this stuff, but I have to tell you, most folks don't understand advanced directives. They aren't what we think they are in many cases. There's lots of folks that maybe are thinking that a living will is just exactly what I think it is, but there are so many nuances there. We try to teach people to make sure that these things are inculcated, if you will, in an agreement as they should be. For example, one is that my doctor is going to make this decision. Most of those particular agreements say that whatever physician's on call at that particular time, make that decision. And that doctor may have no idea who you are. And in a care community, it could very well be the case. Other items to consider, obviously, end-of-life concerns are things like DNRs, best do not resuscitate, things like that. Choose somebody, do some research on hospice, understanding, what is their aim here? What's our role? What's the pastor's role? I've actually had a situation where in my own care community, one of my own members, husband had just passed away. We've been sitting there praying and talking, visiting. And I finally said, Virginia, well, let's go and we'll let the funeral director do his thing. And in the middle of my prayer and discussion with her, a hospice chaplain had come in and just sat quietly, which was okay. But he said to her, you don't have to go. And I said, pardon me? And she goes, she don't have to go. She can sit here for a while. I said, I know that, but now is that anyway, I got an argument with this guy in my care community, in my member, and he'd known this person for 2 weeks. Many cases, pastors are not part of that ministry team, and you have to insert yourself in a way that's helpful. And you should talk to your pastors about what happens when that time comes. What is the thing we should plan on to expect? And what is your role, pastor?
5 minutes.
These are all scriptures. I didn't put the reference. You got Isaiah 46, Job, and the Psalms. Obviously, God respects, loves, and cares for people that are old. And that doesn't mean that you're no longer a valuable child of God. In fact, even Solomon in all of his wisdom is, consulted elders, if you will, about decisions that he was about to make. So that kind of a thought process is important for us to reinforce with our members that are in care communities. You still are a valuable person. We do love you. You have a lot to give. In our particular case, we're in intergenerational care, so we educate kids in a school on our campus, and those folks are involved with that. Any way we can bring value to life, because that's what God does. And in Christ Jesus, they are more valuable than anything else. These are some resources. And again, I would urge the church to wake up and to be ready for these arguments and debates, legislative movements and initiatives, because they're coming. In California, which is one of the states that has this particular law or a law like this, actually insurance companies have refused to provide for the second or third round of chemotherapy in a cancer condition because it's probably not going to work. And what they will, however, pay for is the prescription for you to take care of the end of your life. Again, those are the decisions that should be between, that should actually be God's, not between you and your insurance company, or not in your hands at all. Take a look at what your state is about. Really do find legislators or candidates for office that are life affirming, not just on the beginning, but also on the end. And we need to pray about this. Consider what are the legislative things that we as the church should do around this issue, because it's coming. We don't have much time, but questions that you might have. Very good. Yes.
What about withdrawal care, stopping at code after 20 minutes, those kinds of things?
I think that, allowing a person to die is great. Killing a person is a different story. There are all kinds of good Lutherans for Life and others have resources about how allowing a person to die, sustaining life, but not continuing to force life when death is imminent. And in many ways, things like when grandma stops eating and someone insists, well, you got to keep feeding grandma, or you got to keep giving her water. That actually inflicts pain in many cases. And so there's a lot of research and education to be done there. There are good materials that help with that as well. But I would tell you about do not resuscitate. It's not like on TV. almost 90% of everybody on TV that gets, resuscitated lives. In a care community, that doesn't happen, and often it does great damage to people. I would encourage you to think about whether or not to do not resuscitate is really what you want in a care community, because by law, that care community has to administer CPR until they're in the hospital. Good question. Thanks for asking. Anything else?
Are your sprays going to, if not, can you go back to that, I get two web addresses on your spray.
Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. I've been told that before. Is this the one?
One before that. Thank you.
And I know some of the people in the room have a poli-sci degree that maybe this politics thing is a good answer, David. I have no idea. Here's a takeaway that real fast. You can take a look at those. There's lots that we can do as the church, as the people of God in pregnancy, supporting folks around adoption, supporting folks in life, especially at the end.